like to start off by asking for a roll call.
Chair Pulitz,
Present?
Vice Chair Norvell,
Here.
Treasurer Rogers,
Here.
Member Golden,
Here.
Member Hamilton, Member Horton, Member Hutter. A quorum is present.
Okay, a quorum is present, and now it's time for the Pledge of Allegiance. John, how would you like to do tonight?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I assume that all the board members have had a chance to look at the minutes from our past meeting that was published. And I'm asking for a motion to approve the minutes. Okay, motion to approve the minutes by Mr. Hamilton and has been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes have been approved. So the chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most efficiently process the agenda items. Items may be taken out of order, items may be combined for consideration by the authority, and items may be pulled or removed from the agenda at any time. Public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the airport authority may speak on agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. If your item requires extended discussion, please request the chairman to calendar the matter for a future airport authority meeting. The public may provide public comment in advance of a meeting by a written submission to the following email address: manager@flycarson.com. For inclusion or reference in the minutes of the meeting, your public comment must include your full name and address and be submitted via email by not later than 5 p.m. the day before the meeting. The Carson City Airport values your input. Members of the public who wish to provide live public comment may do so during the designated public comment periods indicated on the agenda in person. All right. Let's start off with the airport engineer's report.
All right, so for the record, Brian Martinez-Molas, Wood Rogers. A couple things tonight. First, around the ACIP. So on July 3rd, the Carson City Board of Supervisors approved our ACIP, including all projects that were proposed for fiscal year 24 to be into 25. So with that, we can apply for grants for fiscal year 25 in accordance with the ACIP. And so kind of going through that list, the first one will be the runway drainage project. That one is pending environmental studies that are currently underway. So once we have that, we will be able to work with the airport manager to get those applications in. The other thing is there's been ongoing coordination with the FAA ADO on the runway extension projects utilizing bill monies. And so we will continue that. We do need the ADO support in order for those projects to proceed. Moving along, again on funding, the FAA has issued or opened up application period for bill money for terminal projects. So we will be working with Corey on getting an application in for design services for a terminal. And then lastly, another kind of scope of work would be noise abatement. We've been working with Corey on that, of getting together some support services to update the noise abatement procedures and really graphical support associated with that. So that's all I had on my list. If there's any questions or anything else.
Any questions for Brian? Okay, thank you, Brian.
I can add a couple items for Armstrong.
Please do.
So we've received a picture of what they say is our snowplow. So supposedly the truck has been built and would then be transported to 2 different locations to be outfitted with all of the hydraulics and materials for it to function as a snowplow. and then a different provider for radio, lighting, and all of those accessories. That's not going to be a very quick process. It's still going to take a while. But at the rate it's going, we should hopefully have it before this winter. And the plow itself is going to be shipped separately, which will end up being about 4,500 pounds. So we're going to need some assistance moving that. Rick Lee has reached out to the National Guard, and they are going to help us unload it and stage it so where we can hook it up to the actual plow. We have met all of the requirements for the snow removal equipment building permit application, and that will now be submitted since Tim has signed off on the special inspector for that permit. And that's all that I've got.
Any questions for Corey? If not, we'll move on. We have no consent agenda
Mr.
tonight.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious if there are any updates to the offset PAPI.
So the last correspondence I have about the offset PAPI was we requested a detailed explanation as to what the material delays are. We have not yet received that list. They do say that they have created a draft schedule, and that includes that information, but they have not sent us the schedule yet. And that's where we're at with that one.
Thanks, Corey. Okay, for public hearings, we have one item on the agenda tonight, something we've been working on for a long time, and I'm glad to see us getting to the point where we get to actually put it in motion. This item number 1 is for discussion and possible action. Review and approve amendments to the airport rules and regulation from the Carson City Master, that CCMC is Carson City Municipal Code.
Correct.
Title 19, as to through the fence provisions and general access provisions. This will be presented by Council Steve Takis.
Yeah, thank you. Steve Takis, Airport Council. This was a collaborative effort between airport staff, the team at Carson Tahoe Executive, and a couple of members of the Airport Authority. The chairman and the vice chair were also present in many of our meetings and also gave us helpful feedback. The bottom line is to do a hangar project such as the one proposed by Carson Tahoe Executive, and there may be others, we need to make changes to Title 19 because it wasn't designed for a hangar project or an association of hangars outside the fence. It was only originally designed just for a manufacturer who has a corporate aircraft and a corporate hangar. And so CTE actually took the first shot at this, and they did a really good job with the first draft. We worked through a number of changes, and so what you have in front of you is the draft that staff is recommending that you go ahead and approve. And so let me just highlight a couple of things. One thing is we had already pending a need to update Title 19. The authority had approved rates last year that we still hadn't gotten. We had adopted for use here for through the fence, but they had not gone through the city process because those rates appear. Carson City Municipal Code is adopted also by the city. And so that piece we inserted in here, although as I'm going to explain to you, we modified that because we think we've got a better solution than running back and forth to the city every time we change a rate, especially given that the FAA requires us to reevaluate those rates every 5 years. The other piece was we noticed when we were looking at Title 19 that our public access section really only referred to vehicles. It didn't refer to people, pedestrians. It didn't refer to aircraft and other things. So we enlarged that language. Now with that, we went through Title 19, and I say that as a collective we because on this portion, CTE did most of the heavy lifting. and came up with a definition for an AHA, which is a adjacent hangar association. So it's to describe the kind of situation where you've got through the fence access, not to an individual property owner or individual, rather, manufacturer like we have today, or an individual hangar use, but to a multiple hangar use so that they could build a hangar project. And we've looked at their CC&Rs. Those look very clean. And so what this does is it integrates this concept into our Title 19. It required, if you look at the red line, there's a lot of red lines in there. There's a lot of deletions and insertions because it required a lot of language changes to adopt this new structure. There are two, and I guess the short version of it is we've just created a system where they can utilize the airport for their gate access. There are going to be provisions specific to each project in there through the fence permit. Like, for example, what are we doing about the gate? Or what are we going to do about security, which is, of course, a big issue for the FAA. It's a big issue for us as well. But in terms of Title 19, we're just building the structure so that they can actually move forward with the project to the next step. And there's going to be several steps before we have to get FAA approval to march down the rest of the path. But this is a necessary step along the path. And so we wanted to get this set up sooner rather than later. In terms of fees, the arrangement that we came up with, because the FAA has said that we need to have a significant financial advantage to the airport to allow a hangar project outside of the airport instead of on the airport. So what we've done is we put in a provision saying, with respect to these kinds of hangar projects through the fence, there would not be an offset to the through the fence fee for their property taxes. Currently, as it stands, we have two through the fence operators. That would be Click Bond and Mustang Manufacturing. And Title 19, as it sits today, says that their through the fence fee, it sets a fee of $900. I can't remember what it is exactly. It's 43 cents, I think, per square foot of hangar space. But it's offset by any property taxes that we get as a result of that hangar construction outside the fence. And so what we're doing with the hangar associations, in these hangar associations instead, is we're just not having an offset. And that should produce something that we can something we can show the FAA that there's a significant financial difference. And we're hoping that that's significant enough to carry the weight with the FAA. And that's something that we have to work through together. However, in looking at it, as I mentioned earlier, we seem to be caught in this thing where the FAA says we have to update them every 5 years. That came out of a land use audit that the FAA did, 6 or 7 years ago. It might have been longer than that. And they told us the method that we were using was the correct method of determining what the through the fence fees are. Namely, you look at the operating expenses of the airport, you divide it by the square feet of hangar space, both on the airport and off the airport, and now you have a per square foot hangar way to measure operating expenses. And so that's really how we generated the fee. They also told us that we need to update it at least every 5 years. And so that's what we've been doing. And we just updated it about a year ago. So it's not going to be due again for 4 years. But each time we make a change to Title 19, we have to put the city through all the same steps that we have to go through. And it's a longer process. It's 2 readings of the ordinance. There's considerable notification to property owners that are affected. There's just a lot of steps to it. And so our thought process and what we have proposed to you is, let's not do it that way anymore. The NRS Chapter 844, which is the chapter that created the Airport Authority, specifically gives the airport authority the right to set fees and charges. And so our recommendation is, let's take the rates out of the regulation and instead say, under the regulation, the airport authority will set those fees and charges. You know, whenever we have a body that's setting fees and charges, it is natural for people to say, oh, what's going to protect them from not, from doing something nasty and charging something that's outrageous to us. And here we have that built in because the FAA has given us the methodology, which is keyed to our operating expenses divided by square footage. Now, in the past, using that method, the through the fence fees have gone up every 5 years when we did the calculations. But in part of that is because operating expenses you would expect to go up, at least some over the years. The square footage was not going up. It could well be that the next time we look at it, if the CTE project, and now we have Ortiz and we have other hangar projects, when we start looking at the square footage, who knows, the rates might actually go down. Those operating expenses might be shared among a bigger pool of square footage. So there is a built-in mechanism to prevent or to at least protect those who might be concerned that there would be, an oppressive rate developed. And so in terms of the rates, when you get to the rate section, we've taken out the rates. We've left in the provisions to say there's no tax offset for the hangar association projects because we need that to show to the FAA for off-airport developments. But we have left untouched the tax offset that we've been using historically for the single manufacturer with a corporate hangar situation. And we believe that that is okay under the FAA regulations. We've looked at them closely enough. Let me see, what else can I tell you about the regulation? We also was brought to our attention that currently, if you're in a lease on the airport, the leases require liability insurance. And so if if your aircraft is in a hangar that's on an airport lease on the hangar, let's say the Ortiz lease, there will be liability protection, insurance protection provided to the airport via that association. We didn't have anything like that for through the fence. So our initial idea is, well, let's come up with something that would apply to through the fence. And the more we thought about it, it really is more an issue of we're going to have the same liability issues when an aircraft is taxiing on the airport, whether it is just taxied in through a through the fence gate or it's taxied out of a hangar in a hangar development. And so the real issue is the aircraft need to have insurance. And so we've added a provision saying aircraft that are based on the airport need to have insurance. And all of us who own airplanes have insurance, I believe. And what we're talking about is liability insurance. And so what we did is we included a provision, and we didn't set the amount of liability insurance. That's something that you guys will have to determine. And I think you're going to need more data to determine that, because it may be very different, the amount of liability insurance for a large aircraft versus something that's small and light. The ability or the possibility of damages from a larger aircraft are more significant. And so I think that the approach there is what we did is we put language in saying in a reasonable amount to be determined by the authority. And what we need to do is collect some data and determine what's appropriate. My thought is all of us who insure our airplanes are very protective about the values of our airplanes. And if we look at the insurance that's in place right now, I suspect that will give us a pretty good yardstick of how to set those insurance rates. But that's data that still needs to be collected. But I think you can go, I know you can go forward at this point with the amendment to Title 19, because that's something that we will develop over time, and also you may change from time to time. But I can answer any questions you have about the draft or of any of the individual red lines. And I know that Bruce is from CTE is here and can probably also jump in to answer questions. Yes, sir.
So, I realize this, this aircraft liability just got put in here more recently as an
Yeah.
addition here. But I think when we say all aircraft based at the airport,
Mhm.
now, does that mean the aircraft that's sitting in the back of the hangar? Does that mean we're going to exclude ultralights? Does that mean what all aircraft, I think, is going to be, if we let something like that go through, we're setting ourselves up for some big problems. We all may have aircraft insurance, but not everybody at the airport does. So I think we need to rephrase this in some way that it's going to be applicable to what we're doing.
We certainly could rephrase it. My thinking is you're going to have aircraft that are under construction. You know, people are building their own experimental aircraft. They're not going to be able to get insurance until it's built and it's airworthy. And so there's going to be situations where it's going to be an aircraft, or it's going to be parts of an aircraft, or an aircraft in progress.
I've got an aircraft sitting in the back of my hangar. It's been sitting there for 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. It's probably never going to be flown, probably be sold. So we're going to ask, so to have him, as an example,
Yeah.
get insurance for that aircraft, that's not, I mean, you guys would all be surprised at how many aircraft are at this airport that don't have insurance. And,
That are flyable, that are airworthy.
yep, the people are flying and the whole.
Well, that's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? I mean, I can assure you that if we had a conversation with the FAA, they would be saying, what? How is that possible that you would have aircraft that are airworthy that don't have insurance? That's a liability problem that I don't think the city would ever want to have allowed. And we certainly, I wouldn't think, would want to allow that. But I think what you're talking about is true. There's going to be a spectrum, and there's going to be certain aircraft that are not going to fit that category. That is part of, I think, the decision on where do you set this number, and it may be 0 on this spectrum that starts with, something big and expensive and heavy, down to something that may be a work in progress or not flyable, or for
I
some
just
other
think
reason.
that we ought to be really careful when you see all aircraft based at the airport. That needs to be changed in some way, because that is not going to be beneficial to our patrons and customers, because there's going to be a lot of aircraft that just are, I mean, the aircraft sitting out on the old World War II aircraft sitting out on the hangars, that mean those two, I guess? I just think there's that. I think that's a much too broad a term.
Okay, and how would you suggest that we word it?
Well, I don't know yet.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
I don't know the answer to that. I
Curtis,
just,
Go ahead.
That's a good idea.
What about aircraft that are towed or taxied onto the airport? If the wheels are turning out there on the property, you have to have liability insurance.
Yeah.
I don't care what's in your hangar, that's fine, work on your aircraft, that's wonderful. But if you're gonna taxi or you're gonna be towed, across the airport, you need liability insurance.
operating aircraft, unfortunately, I haven't had enough time to think this whole thing through here, but something that would be beneficial to our patrons here that don't need it. Have we ever had a situation at this airport where, because we haven't had this in here, all aircraft must have liability insurance.
Right.
Over the however many years we've had this airport, have we ever had, how many instances have we had that this was a mistake and we should have had that in there?
I know of one.
Well, I know of a whole bunch here on our airport. Every time somebody has an accident on the airport, they report to their insurance, and the insurance reaches out to us saying, we think it's partially your fault.
So what would we do wrong? I mean,
Well, they'll
were we
say,
ever convicted?
Doesn't matter.
no. Well, okay. Well, I'll give you a good example. We had a guy with a Piper Malibu who landed short of the runway. He was out there, the Piper Malibus were shut down for a while, that you couldn't fly them. The FAA did some kind of grounding of them. Well, they ungrounded him. He calls his wife and says, put the insurance in place. I'm going to go fly to Malibu. And what does he do? He comes out and he's doing practice short field landings, but he's landing at the end of the runway instead of what good instructors like you and others would say, pick the 1,000-foot mark for your end of the runway for your practice, because it's practice. You're going to be short, sometimes you're going to be long. He picked the end of the runway, he landed short, and the gravel, because the state jet would always take off from right there, was pushed away from the edge, and so there was a concrete lip there. He hit it with his landing gear, he crinkled an entire wing, and he filed a lawsuit against us.
Because it was our fault that we had that.
Our fault. And we looked at him and said, wait a second, doesn't your insurance also cover us? And no, it didn't. And, ultimately, that lawsuit, we were able to successfully defend. We were able to show that is not an airport issue. That is a pilot issue. But yes, those kinds of things happen. Every time we have an incident on the airport, there's a risk of that. And the common response is it's something to do with the design of the airport or the condition of the pavement or the maintenance or something like that. And if we had this additional insurance, we would have another arrow in our quiver to deal with those.
Michael?
Thank you. I've been somewhat ambivalent about this particular discussion about the insurance, but I'm going to weigh in, having had to deal with the DMV so many times this year. When you go down to the DMV on Right Way, you cannot register your vehicle without having liability insurance. They will not issue you your registration without it. I don't think it's unreasonable for the airport to mandate that all aircraft have insurance that are operating here at the airport. In light of what is public policy with motor vehicles, I don't see why an airworthiness, an aircraft that has an airworthiness certificate should somehow not have insurance. That's all I got to say.
I'll be honest with you, I'm shocked.
Go ahead, Curtis. Yeah.
It's stunning that it's not a requirement.
Go ahead, Corey.
I don't think you have enough money in the bank to solve that problem if it ever happens.
There's a common saying in the safety industry: the absence of an incident is not an indication of a safe operation. And I think this is a good example of that. We have a liability risk here that needs to be addressed. This came to our attention specifically as we're looking at Through the Fence, but we see that this is a bigger issue than Through the Fence. But with the introduction of the increased Through the Fence activity, we'll be adding a large number of aircraft which have no liability requirement at all. Right now we have hangar insurance liability requirement, which is going to cover a lot of things, not everything that we needed covered, but that is missing entirely from the Through the Fence subject. So our exposure is about to increase with the increase of Through the Fence. So again, the absence of the incident is not an indication of safety. So
Okay, well, I will go back and say that I've come up with the terminology.
Okay?
Operating aircraft based at the airport. Wheels turning, something that is going to help our patrons.
Okay, let me
Operating.
interject here. I don't think we have to solve this problem today.
Okay,
It's not, we can still approve this agenda item without having the exact verbiage for insurance. Isn't that correct, Steve?
Well, we could, except, part of our goal is to get it completed so we can get it to the next step, which would be getting it to the city. So we adopt it here, we get it to the city for adoption in Title 19, and then we go through all the notification, the notice processes. And so ideally, we want to come out of this meeting with the verbiage that we're going to hand to the city, and then go forward. And
Okay, well, then I would recommend that we make it pretty, pretty broad. I think operating aircraft is reasonable. I don't think the amount of liability has to be discussed at this time because that's a whole nother bailiwick. but the fact that we agree that we have to, that an airplane should have liability insurance operating out of this airport is reasonable.
Yeah, so what do we do with, I mean, Member Horton actually made a good point. Sometimes aircraft are being towed on the airport. We'd want to make sure that there's some insurance to protect us on that too. I had actually inserted the language that Member Horton had actually described, which is all aircraft based at the airport prior to taxiing or towing on the airport shall be covered by liability insurance.
That sounds good to me.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Any comments from the public?
Uh,
Harlow, go ahead.
Yeah.
Ultralight squeak by with no insurance.
I don't know. That's a decision that you guys will decide later, whether that should be a 0 or whether there should be something in there. I kind of assume that ultralights have some kind of liability assurance available to them.
Ultralights are not aircraft. They're vehicles.
Really?
They're actually vehicles. Yeah, there's a big deal of why the FAA has not called ultralights aircraft. They're vehicles. So if we really want to do a good job, we'd say, whatever we said there, aircraft and ultralight vehicles. Unless we don't want the ultralights to have insurance.
That's a new one on me. I did not realize that.
No, that's it.
Ultralight.
Trust me.
Okay, well, then the solution is to say aircraft and ultralight vehicles. And then you can still decide what level of insurance, whether it's
course,
0 or $100, I mean, whatever you think the liability is. And when you do that, you're going to be thinking, okay, what is our liability risk from this aircraft? And clearly, an ultralight, there's less liability risk than something that's big that could cause more damage if it did things.
Yeah, not that I want to provide extra requirements, but I think that would be, we ought to at least be clear so we're covered in all areas.
Steve?
By the way, I also want to say that what a great job of everyone going through attachment B.
Yeah.
I read through it all and it's spectacular. So that's all I have to say.
Michael, one more thing?
Yeah, just clarification here on your additional language. The terminology for coverage would be in motion. So they would be required to carry in motion coverage and liability. That's the insurance terminology.
Okay. I mean, what we're really worried about is protecting liability, but if that's what it's called, we can certainly.
Yeah,
add.
in other words, the aircraft is moving. That's called in motion coverage.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do what you want with it.
I'm just thinking, I'm not challenging you. I'm sure you know more about this than I do. But I'm just thinking, by using the term liability insurance, I think we have that covered. I think if it turns out the real title should be in motion and liability, when you figure out what you're going to make the reasonable amounts, that's a reasonable way to describe it. I mean, you can do it then, I guess is what I'm saying.
I can add a little bit to that. I'm looking at a policy right in front of me, and there is liability coverages, limits of liability. Then there is each occurrence, each person category, and there is single limit, including passengers, with passenger liability limited to. This all falls under the limits of liability section of the policy. So I think liability coverages and limits of liability language would work.
I think that could be done by the authority later, just by saying there's liability insurance. I think it's
Yeah.
very common to have liability insurance that says 100,000 per person, million per incident. And I think those are the kinds of details you would work out later.
Yeah, for the purpose of this meeting, I prefer we keep it a little bit vague, just agree that we do want to have liability insurance subject to dialing in the appropriate terminology and verbiage that is acceptable to the,
Yeah.
to insurance carriers as well as to the city and the board.
Right. There's some more work that has to be
So
done.
if you could just kind of, if you don't mind, let's have Steve try to prepare a motion that would encompass these priorities for this particular item.
Okay, well, here's the language that I've jotted down per the good suggestions that were made. All aircraft and ultralight vehicles based at the airport prior to taxiing or towing on the airport shall be covered by liability insurance maintained by the owner or operator of the aircraft. Actually, it should be of the aircraft or ultralight vehicle.
Does that mean that we need to prove to the airport manager, for example, that we are insured, or are we talking about making the airport authority additional insured?
What we're saying is the airport authority should be an additional insured. We use that language here. To my understanding, that doesn't create an additional financial burden on anybody. That is something that you can do for free. And now if I'm wrong about that, you would certainly want to factor that in. But I've done it before on my insurance policy. Yeah. Yeah, it's easy peasy. And so that's what we're doing. In terms of how do you report this or do this, that's a mechanical thing that I think the airport manager can put together. Maybe at the same time you're doing the gate cards, you just collect that information. Or we say, okay, provide it to us. If it changes, let us know and go forward. And most of those policies say that you need to give notification to the additional insureds before you change it. I mean, we already have a mechanism in place that we use for the insurance for the leaseholders. And so we've got a mechanism in place. What we're talking about here is just making sure there's liability protection.
I still propose that we don't get the final perfect verbiage yet. I think we get it, leave ourselves some wiggle room to make sure we get it correct. Just that we agree to have the liability insurance as a requirement, and we'll come up with a more specific, whether it has to be additional insured, whether it has to be this or that. I think that there's a lot of details that could really bite us in the feet later on if we don't pay attention to this. So
Another thing that comes to mind is a maintenance operator who's towing an aircraft that doesn't have insurance. I think they should be able to do that. If the maintenance
Yeah.
operator has insurance, the language that the insurance is maintained by the owner would be a conflict for that.
If the owner did not have insurance, but it was being towed by the maintenance operator, is that the scenario?
Yeah.
Why? I mean,
Well,
There wouldn't be-
there could be an airplane in somebody's hangar. It's not.
we would
airworthy.
be protected from liability as long as the guy towing it had some insurance or there was some kind of protection for us. But
The language as it is now would not allow that operation.
okay.
So again, if we can just come up with a proposal, it's not locked in with every single scenario, but that we're going to be perfecting this, but the liability requirement is agreed upon.
I'm just going to add as determined by the authority.
There you go.
And I think that just gives you the flexibility
go.
to figure out what each of these little exceptions might be.
Good. Any other comments?
Go ahead, Harlan, sorry. I apologize. Just regarding option 2, as mentioned in your email, Steve, and is that in reference to 19.03.060 fees?
Right.
And are we suggesting that the red line portion be replaced with some other wording, or that
Okay.
it be added to what is currently, what we have in our notes here?
Look at the document that I gave you, and I apologize, there aren't page numbers on it, but if you go to 19.03.060.
Yep.
We've inserted language in there at the very top that would go in and everything else would go away. And so basically it will say, the airport authority shall assess annual fees following the method approved by the FAA based on operation expenses divided by square footage of hangar space. That protects, this from not being an oppressive thing. And then we have one for single permittees or manufacturers. We basically retain the situation that we have for the existing manufacturer through the fence. And then for AHA developments, there's no offset. And then we have we just say, and we can charge a flat fee for people who have through the fence and have outside aircraft storage, because we had a couple of different rates in there. If you've got through the fence and you regularly store aircraft outside, well, we don't have a hangar to calculate square footage, so we can find a way to charge that. Therefore, what we did is we plugged in a flat fee, and it's a smaller flat fee. But that would be the language of that section, and we would eliminate the rest. Well, actually, there's still other language that we worked through with CTE. There's still one more paragraph in there, but the language that we're deleting is the language that lists the exact rates.
Any other comments or questions?
Corey, I would like you to contact Cecilia Meyer, the city's risk manager, and chat with her a little bit about that. Just maybe get some ideas or perspective. I think it'd be a good idea.
Sounds good.
John Rogers.
Back to the fees section.
Yes.
In the preamble, it says that the FAA method is to take operation expenses divided by square footage. And then in paragraph 4, or the new 4, the blue 4, it says that it will be calculated by the airport maintenance cost divided by the amount of square footage and by the amount of hangar space. And so
Oh, actually, it should be maintenance in both, I believe.
I disagree. I think it ought to be operation expenses.
I'd have to go
In
back.
both.
It
It used to be maintenance. I think we have an opportunity to be more clear, because you could parse that for as long as you want as
yeah.
what constitutes a maintenance
No,
expense.
it isn't just maintenance, it's the operation.
Yeah, total operating
Yeah,
expense.
And so that's
I would say based on total operating expenses divided by in both cases.
yeah, we'll make sure those are consistent too. Because I'll go back through it and just make sure they all use the same terminology. But if you go back, and I don't have that in front of me, and go back and look at the formula calculation that we used, it isn't just the maintenance. It isn't just like taking care of the fog ceiling. It's the operation expenses.
Sure, we might as well state that though,
Yeah.
since we're modifying Title 19.
Yeah, the FAA was pretty clear on that. They just want to make sure everybody's helping pay for the operation maintenance.
Right.
Hangars on the airport are already doing that. We want to make sure through the fence also does that.
Right.
Well, if there's no other questions, maybe Steve can go ahead now, try to prepare what the motion should say. Yeah, I already asked for public and no comments.
Yeah, my recommendation is you move to approve the proposal as presented by staff with the language changes that were suggested by the authority members. And then I'll just incorporate those and clean it up.
Okay, any other discussion before we vote? I'd like to ask for someone to make the motion then.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adopt the amendments to the airport rules and regulations, and to include the additional language as proposed by authority members and by airport staff, and authorize airport staff to pursue with the city these changes to Carson City Municipal Code Title 19. Does that do it?
Yep.
Well said. Any other discussion?
I second.
Okay, we're asking for a second, and second by Mr. Rogers. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Great.
Very good.
Yeah, I'll get it cleaned up and Corey and I will get it to the city to get it in process. And I'll be following up with the DA's office to see what kind of notifications we need to give to property owners. Because we want to get that going as quickly as possible too.
If we're done with this, we'll move on to the airport manager's report.
Okay, so this past week I completed the American Association of Airport Executives Certified Member course, and I also passed the test. So I now have an additional credential of Certified Member of AAAE. I'd like to thank all the help that I received from Steve Takis and Tim Poulos and Rick Lee and Kim Pilot and for all their help in making it possible for me to take that course. That was right at the time in preparing for this meeting, and it wouldn't have been possible without everybody stepping up to help. So thank everyone for what you did to make that possible.
Your credentials are longer than a brain surgeon.
Getting there. So this was already talked about a little bit, so I'm just going to hit on it. You know, we're moving forward with plans to update our noise abatement procedures. This is something that I started a while ago in cooperation with High Sierra Pilots. High Sierra Pilots has done a great job in helping us produce additional new documentation, but more work is required. A big component of this is that the FAA has implemented a program to include noise abatement procedures with the chart supplement for the airport. This is brand new and is not fully implemented yet, but by going through a formal process to update our new noise abatement procedures, we'll make sure they get included. This will help the community greatly because transient pilots will have greater access to our noise abatement procedures. So pilots that are not from around this area will be able to see those more easily. Our procedures are published on our website, but a pilot's not going to go check the airport's website every time they fly. They're going to check the actual flight planning documentation. So by going through this process, will get us in a much better place for the community of Carson City for noise abatement procedures.
But those changes would remain suggested, right? We don't
Yes.
have an operating control tower or anything.
Yeah, noise abatement procedures are a advisory. They're not required. Pilot ultimately has the final discretion as to how they're going to fly their airplane, and noise abatement procedures could potentially put them into a position that they don't want to be in, which would not be good for anyone. So any pilot is authorized to fly their airplane in the safest manner possible, and they would not be penalized if they're outside of those noise abatement procedures. But pilots are professionals who have put in a lot of effort, time, and money into getting their credentials. They want to support the local communities. So by us getting this information out to them, they will be doing their best to meet what we're asking with the noise abatement procedures. The final maps that will be produced will include the noise-sensitive areas, as well as the new procedures, which is lacking in our current noise abatement procedures. A public meeting will be a part of this process, so the community will be able to submit their comments about what we present. Okay.
I just would like to add that one of the complications here is that the FAA procedures are to take off and go right over our sensitive areas until they get to almost pattern altitude and make their turn, where our noise abatement procedures are to make a turn a little bit earlier than that. So here we're juggling our noise abatement procedures with the FAA procedures. So that's why we're going down this route. So it's interesting compromise.
Yeah. And what we're proposing is, while we don't have any final maps in front, we have a good idea of what it's going to look like. We know that what we're proposing is not nearly as extreme as what many airports propose. So we believe it's very reasonable what we're going to try to achieve. And we've even done flight testing with some airport users to see the validity of what we're trying to do, and it all looks very possible and very safe, as well as a bonus to the community.
Will it be all aircraft or turbojet aircraft or?
It's a good question. So there will be published different procedures for different types of aircraft, but the airport's traffic pattern is pretty standard according to FAA regulations. And so it will be the airport's traffic pattern that gets adjusted. And that is within the airport's authority to do noise abatement procedures. So it'll be like the standard recommendation, although we are fully aware not every aircraft is going to be able to do what we're suggesting.
I mean, just like John Wayne had a max performance climb to 500 feet, level off 50% power until you pass the noise sensor, which means coasting out, and then you can bring the power back up. Otherwise, it's a $10,000 fine, and the next time you can't use the airport anymore. I mean, that's pretty draconian, but that's the way.
So,
But they have a tower.
That type of procedure is no longer permitted. It's grandfathered in Orange County. There was a congressional act called ANCA, A-N-C-A, that prohibits those sort of things.
I'm a little dated, but I did it hundreds of times.
I bet you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're no longer permitted at airports. You can't develop them.
a noise abatement procedure like that requires FAA approval. We're not suggesting anything that would actually require FAA approval. Something that would require FAA approval is an extreme example and would not be good for the airport. We won't be doing anything like as extreme as that. We're just trying to put the aircraft within the traffic pattern, not over homes, as best as we can. Okay, the 4th of July event. Actually, I'm skipping an item. FAA camera installation. So the FAA camera installation is scheduled to take place this week. I thought it might take place today, but they didn't make it today, so it will probably end up being done tomorrow. And it should be operational fairly soon here. So I'm really excited about that. The 4th of July event. So the airport was closed to landing traffic, runway 27, and departing traffic, runway 9, during the 4th of July due to the firework demonstration that was just off the end of the runway. That whole evening went really well. And I also took some video that demonstrates the fireworks were very minimal disruption to the airport. And I have some more research to do, but it may be possible to avoid closing the runway in the future. There's a lot of things that we need to look at, including if we get the nighttime approval for the instrument approach. That will be a factor in all this. We may have to note them the approach as being out of service, but maybe able to leave the runway open, something like that. But I was really happy with the safety level of the fireworks, and hopefully it's an indication we can do that moving forward with no issues. Mowing on the airfield has been improved greatly. This is primarily because of the additional staff, and it's also because of the additional equipment. Not only that, the additional staff and the equipment match very well together. So Cody is very good at operating a Bobcat. He brings that experience to the airport, and he has been able to mow in areas that the airport has never been able to mow in before. And it's very visually apparent at the airport, and they deserve recognition for that.
I stopped by today and thanked him because it's a big difference. I mean, that whole west side of the airport was spectacular.
Right. So the vegetation is still there, and it's definitely still doing its job of controlling the dust hazards and erosion. It's definitely not removing the vegetation. It's just mowing it and keeping it under control, which is also good for wildlife habit mitigation as well. we've had minimal to no wildlife issues at the airport in this past year, and I think the mowing has contributed to that. Okay, snowplow, we already covered all of those items. Fuel flowage is up 9% over the previous year. And airport operations were down 18% over the previous year. That's an interesting change. I think we're only seeing a reduction in operations due to the excessive heat at the airport. But that is another demonstration that larger aircraft are using the airport. So we have more turboprops and jets at the airport operating. That's all that I have. I'm available for any questions.
I don't have anything additional.
Nothing from the legal counsel?
Nothing, thank you.
All right. Treasurer's report.
These numbers this month are the year-end numbers preliminary prior to audit. And as in previous years, we're slightly over budget on revenues, approximately 3% more than we budgeted for. We're noticeably under budget on expenses, around 20% less than we expected. So it's another good year in the books, thanks in large part to management of the airport. And Corey deserves quite a bit of recognition for that.
Thank you.
That's it, John? All right, thank you. Very good. Any other comments from the members on any other subjects? None? Nothing from the public? None? We don't have any agenda items ready for the next meeting yet. That will come as determined. So with that, I propose this meeting is adjourned.